This podcast is brought to you by Proton Dealership IT, experts in dealership cybersecurity and IT management. Interested in a free cybersecurity, compliance, or IT consultation? Visit protontex.com. That's PROTONTECHS.com.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Monday, October 27th, 2025. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, EV sales are likely to plunge more than 40% in October. U.S. assembly plants could be just weeks away from shutdowns due to the Nexperia chip crisis. And destination fees surge amid rising cost. Plus, GM Chief Product Officer Sterling Anderson talks about the automaker's ambitious tech goals, including eyes-off driving in personal vehicles in 2028.
There are all of these little things happening behind the scenes where the innovations we're making will improve your life, your experience with our cars, in ways that will just feel like a better life, but you don't know why.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. New electric vehicle deliveries are likely to fall 43% in October from a year earlier, following the termination of the federal EV tax credit in the U.S. That's according to a forecast from J.D. Power, citing early data. The research firm projected EV retail sales at about 54,600 in October. It estimated October EV share of the light vehicle market at 5.2%, compared with 8.5% a year earlier. EV share surged to almost 13% in September because of last-minute buying. U.S. auto plants are just 2 to 4 weeks away from disruptions due to the Nexperia chip crisis. That's according to MEMA, the largest auto supplier association in the U.S. Europe's auto industry is already working around the clock to prevent the conflict from triggering production outages. Nexperia has notified its Japanese automotive customers that it may no longer be able to guarantee deliveries. And automakers are upping destination charges on vehicles as costs soar. Within the past year, Chevrolet, Ford, and Ram have upped the destination charge on their flagship half-ton pickups from about $2,000 to $2,600 today. A decade ago, all three brands charged buyers less than half as much to ship those trucks from the factory to the dealership. According to Edmunds, destination fees on vehicles priced under $150,000 rose 8.5% in the 2025 model year. That's the biggest year-over-year jump in its data going back 10 years. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Here to talk more about that story on rising destination fees is Lindsay Van Hully, who is covering the story for us at Automotive News. Lindsay, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Hi, Kel.
So, Lindsay, how much do tariffs have to do with these destination price hikes?
It's hard to say. It's possibly not zero. Analysts I talked to said it's likely that they're beginning to show up. You know, it's interesting. The story came up, at least initially, as we were reporting a couple of weeks ago on just how tariff costs were going to ultimately impact vehicle pricing. A lot of what we've seen so far is that these really big predicted MSRP increases really haven't materialized the way that people anticipated earlier this year. You know, at some point, you know, the question becomes how long are automakers going to absorb that at the bottom line, and how much are they going to have to start passing on to consumers? And at the time, I'd been, you know, kind of looking at price increases and was noticing some destination fee increases on some GM vehicles from 25 to 26. And, you know, it kind of got us thinking about, you know, are we beginning to see it across the industry, you know, beyond just one automaker? And we had Edmunds do some data analysis for us a few years ago, kind of looking at, I think it was 2017 to 2021 and kind of what the increase looks like, and asked them to do a similar analysis. And the increase over that period was higher than it was the first time that they ran it for us. And so talking with analysts, you know, trying to get a sense of what's really behind it, it's difficult to say for any certainty because, brands generally don't really break out all of the expenses that go into the destination charge. It's, in general, it's sort of the same whether, the dealership is across the street from the factory or across the country. But in general, they pointed to higher transportation costs generally, the same kind of inflationary pressure that we've seen in the broader economy. There's some mixed preference too. Customers are preferring larger, heavier vehicles, and that becomes, costlier to ship. But we also know that, there are now import tariffs on vehicles. And so that is making the cost of shipping vehicles and importing vehicles more expensive. And so analysts say it's likely, it's hard to say with any certainty, but that it's likely that some of those tariff costs are beginning to flow into destination charges.
And what are automakers saying about this?
They don't necessarily comment on the tariff piece in particular. They don't break out what goes into there, but in general, they're talking about, trying to stay competitive. GM in a statement said, that their costs reflect the cost of shipping vehicles from factories to dealer showrooms. We review these charges periodically and adjust as needed to keep in line with the overall industry. Stellantis said something similar, that their destination fees are competitive with other automakers that sell large full-size trucks and SUVs. They are talking about, trying to adjust as needed and then to stay competitive. I think that's what they're ultimately, trying to achieve so that they're not any less competitive than any other automaker that sells in their segment.
Perfect. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Cal.
Lindsay's piece is titled Destination Fees Surge as Rising Costs Creep Onto Window Stickers. You can find that on the front page of this week's print edition of Automotive News and over at autonews.com. Coming up, we'll hear part of Lindsay's conversation with GM's Chief Product Officer, Sterling Anderson, about the automaker's big tech ambitions. That's next on Daily Drive.
Automotive News Shift podcast brings you the latest on automotive technology, trends, and transformation. I'm Hannah Lutz.
And I'm Molly Boygon. We're the new co-hosts of Shift, and we're excited to bring you new conversations with experts and industry insiders like this one with Larry Dominique, president of LD Management Consulting.
I do believe the legacy OEMs are falling into a trap. They've got to find a way to, in some ways, build a new airplane while they're still in flight.
Catch Shift, available every Sunday, wherever you get your podcasts.
While you provide top-notch support to your team and customers every day, is anyone taking the time to ensure your sensitive data remains secure? Just one click on a malicious link can place your entire dealership in danger. In fact, the average cost of a data breach surpassed $4 million last year. Stay one step ahead by understanding the threats and minimizing your risk. Proton Dealership IT works around the clock to provide you support 24/7, 365. Operating out of a cutting-edge security operations center located in the USA, Proton continuously monitors, detects, and responds to your potential network issues or cyber threats. You've got a lot on your plate. Keep your focus on where it matters most, your customers. Learn more about our comprehensive services at protontex.com. That's PROTONTECHS.com.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. GM says it will offer eyes-off driving in personal vehicles in 2028. That's just one part of its ambitious tech plans in the coming years, which it announced in New York last week. Our own Lindsay Van Hully caught up with GM Chief Product Officer Sterling Anderson just after the announcement. Here's a piece of their conversation on the Automotive News Shift podcast.
So, at a high level, talk through, I think, just the technology strategy that GM outlined today and really what that's going to unlock and enable for the company going forward.
Sure. Today we talked about where we're going with the future of GM's product portfolio. And in particular, we focused on some innovations we're making to make the vehicle both a more effective part of your life, one that removes sources of friction you probably didn't even know you had, right? And this is across our AI companion, our AI assistant work. It's across some of the foundational pieces that enable it, right? We talked about an electrical vehicle architecture that we are rolling out that centralizes the computing across the vehicle and introduces much higher computational ceiling or headroom for the software that we can roll out over time. And what effectively that will mean for you practically in your life is your car will get better as the longer you own it. It will be enabled to do things that it couldn't do the day you bought it. We also talked a little bit about what we're doing on top of that electrical architecture to deploy an even greater degree of capability that effectively turns your car into a robot in certain ways. One that can ferry you on highways without you having to actively participate in the driving task. And so that's around kind of the evolution of Super Cruise and what we're doing there. We also talked about some of the foundational work we're doing in electric vehicles around a new chemistry called lithium manganese rich that breaks off of the Pareto that the industry has been on for many, many years, where innovation in battery cell chemistry typically involves trade-offs, right? An inherent trade-off between the energy density of that cell and its cost. LMR gets off of this curve with an energy density that's closer to high nickel, which is some of the better chemistries that are quite expensive, at close to the cost of lithium iron phosphate or LFP battery chemistry. That will manifest in your cars as great cars built at lower costs with longer range. So it's a net movement towards the good in terms of what you experience with your vehicle. And then finally, we talked about some of our innovative work in robotics. We have spun up a robotics center with talent from everywhere from Silicon Valley, California to Detroit, Michigan, and everywhere in between, where our people are working on collaborative robots, right? These are robots that are designed not to operate within kind of a human-free zone, as you've seen maybe in body shops and kind of automotive work, but collaboratively alongside humans to take on some of the repetitive and ergonomically challenging tasks that those humans perform and actively participate with them, with production associates in the production of our vehicles, allowing our people to focus on the craftsmanship, on the places that they add real value to that car. We're rolling those cobots out across all of our production facilities worldwide this year. So a lot of really interesting work there. We'll generalize their capability set over time, make them capable of doing more over time.
All of the technology, that you've highlighted today really talks about everything from building the vehicle to, experiencing the vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
that whole sort of through line. And when you think about what you and other executives said today during the presentation, it's this idea of how GM continues to rethink itself, how it makes its vehicles, what even the vehicle is,
Mm-hmm.
and how does all of that come together, I think, in maybe just the necessity of this moment and why it's important to begin to think about advancing in technology that way. What kind of differential does that give you?
Great question. I would characterize the current environment as fluid, right? Be that regulatorily, trade policy, consumer preferences, technology growth. There are a lot of ways the world is changing underneath our feet. The best way to adapt to that change is to build an agile company, one that responds quickly to what comes. One of the best ways to drive agility in a company and an industry that is so dependent on both hardware and software is to abstract the software from the hardware to the degree that you can. All right, and a big part of that comes in the new electric vehicle architecture that we've developed. It allows us to move hardware at the pace of hardware and software at the much faster pace of software to adapt, to learn, and to grow and to get better. So we have to stay agile, and that's a big part of what you see from GM right now. Right? I think it's sometimes characterized as something other than agility. I think sometimes it's perceived as though it's indecisive. The way I'd characterize the decisions we've been making over the last several months as the world has changed, they've been quick, they've been quite decisive, and they've left us in a really good position for taking on the future. If EV adoption picks up rapidly, we've got an extraordinary product portfolio of over 12 vehicles that's growing at a rate that no one else is in EVs. And we are not resting on our laurels there. We are actively developing the next generation of electric vehicles off of these LMR battery chemistries that we talked about, off of a new electrical architecture, bringing together evolution in what we're doing on the vehicle architecture and design as well. So we're not standing still. We're moving pretty quickly to stay abreast of these changes. But at the end of the day, the word that I've used with the team at GM has really been one of spring loading. We have to be spring loaded for wherever these industries take us, whether that's evolutions in AI, whether that's evolution in batteries, changes in consumer preferences, changes in regulatory regimes. We need to be prepared to take on and win in the automotive world, no matter what happens.
You mentioned the new electrical architecture and the central computing system. There's a lot of talk and discussion about software-defined vehicles and how important that's going to be, but it's also really complex and challenging to do. Yeah. GM has looked at this for 2028, but when you think about what that's going to enable GM to do as far as faster connectivity, faster update ability, even just potential revenue applications that haven't even been identified yet. Yeah. Why is that so critical for GM to be pursuing? And what's that really going to bring to consumers, to the company, by having that available? Yeah. At a macro level, it's this pace of change is really what I'd emphasize. The creation of a centralized computing system allows us much more ability to update the software that's in the vehicles from where, previously they were distributed across ECUs all across the vehicle. We had to work through a supplier base, and it was much slower and more painful. What it also did is when you have a distributed computing architecture, it makes every vehicle something of a snowflake from a software perspective. And it makes updating, keeping everything kind of at the same level in terms of performance and capability really difficult. This centralization changes that. It makes our entire vehicle portfolio look very similar to one another from a software perspective. And what that allows us to do is develop a core set of foundational capabilities or functionality, adapt it with very minor tweaks to specific vehicles that it controls, and then roll it out fleet-wide. So what you'll see is a much more agile software development process based on these electrical vehicle architectures. What you'll also see as a function of that, because we can target these updates, we'll start to roll out services much more quickly, right? We talked about our AI assistant. As we roll that out, we'll also roll out kind of other functions that will surprise and delight you well beyond point of purchase of your vehicle. Finally, there are ways that your life will improve with these architectures that you may never notice. I'll give you an example of this. In some of our vehicles, we use magnetic damping suspensions. The response time of a magnetic suspension really matters. And it matters in ways you probably won't pick up except subconsciously. How does that road feel? How tired am I at the end of a trip? That response time between the accelerometer at the wheel that picks up the fact that there was a pothole and that passing through a computer or an ECU somewhere and getting back to an actuator that can change the suspension to adapt for it really, really matters. And with our new electrical architecture, we've cut it by a factor of 10. Right? So a response that previously would have taken on the order of 10 milliseconds takes less than a millisecond to get all the way from the accelerometer all the way back to the actuator. You'll never notice that. And if I hadn't said that, most of the world would never know it. But there are all of these little things happening behind the scenes where the innovations we're making will improve your life, your experience with our cars in ways that will just feel like a better life, but you don't know why. You're a little less tired at the end of that trip. That road feels a little less bumpy. Maybe they repaved it, or maybe I'm just in a new GM vehicle. One of those things, I think, building on that you talked about today as well, I think that gets at that idea is the eyes off system. Mm-hmm. Super Cruise today, eyes on, hands off. Taking it to eyes off is definitely a big step. It is. It's very small, the number of automakers that have that level 3 technology in the market. I don't think anybody does. I know Mercedes does, but it's a limited. Okay. So low speeds, traffic jams. Yeah. And you're looking at highway. We're going for something more than this, right? We're developing your vehicle is self-driving on the highway. And really, how do you think about both, I think, the opportunity and maybe also the risk of taking a leading role in that as opposed to, kind of a fast follower type situation? Yeah. We're going to develop and deploy as quickly as we can do safely. Right? Trust really, really matters here. If you want to play the long game in autonomy, you roll out incrementally.
and slowly. I think that thesis has proven out very well for GM historically. 700 million miles, hands-free miles have been driven with Super Cruise without a single accident attributed to the technology. That's trust you can't buy, right? That's a true foundation for people having confidence in the system that we're building. What Cruise developed in their development tools, their validation infrastructure, a lot of their core IP is also very value accretive to what we're building here. So GM is starting from a position of tremendous strength in self-driving development. And by juxtaposing and combining the best of both of these worlds, we are bringing together teams that understand what broad-scale deployment in hundreds of millions of miles and millions of consumer cars looks like. And on the other side, what development of state-of-the-art machine learning techniques for autonomous driving really have to be.
You can hear GM Chief Product Officer Sterling Anderson's full conversation with our own Lindsay Van Hully on the latest episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast. That's available now wherever you get your podcast. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Lindsay Van Hully and Jack Walsworth for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on tech and innovation, supply chains, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Techion CEO Jay Vijayan.
I feel everything is tracking well. When the time is right, we will think about going public.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.